There you go. The dog and pony show continues. We can't continue without duct tape and dental floss, right? No, our next guest, one that I could say it, I'm a huge fan of. His podcast is a regular staple to my week. He is a best-selling writer, Mississippi best-selling writer. He's written several books. He has a book of poetry coming out here later this year, but he's written a book called Alpha Dogs that we'll talk about a little bit on today's show. He also wrote a book called Flim Flam that caused a lot of controversy, not only in the state of Mississippi, the Southeast, but also around the country. He has a podcast called The Boneyard that you can listen to 3 times a week. And he's also a reporter for 247 Sports, and he is a man of many talents and hats. Let's welcome the man that has 2 nicknames. He's known as Rose Bowl and also Beautiful Steve Robertson. Let's welcome Steve to the show.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I apologize for the quality of the picture. I don't do this stuff very often, so we'll just kind of struggle through it here. I wish I looked as beautiful as you guys do today, but it looks a little rock and roll, I guess, a little 80s video. So
absolutely, man. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Steve, I will say this. I will not ask you to dance.
Well, I can do that too. I mean, I'm not really in the mood right now, but yeah. I mean, that's funny you mentioned that because so back in the early 90s, back when we used to play music, back when we thought we were going to be superstars and doing something other than writing, I was with a dance outfit out of Baton Rouge, a group called Savello. You can find our biggest hit on YouTube called This Jam Is Cold. But yeah, I used to dance regularly. I mean, I danced and, I kept my clothes on. But, I was a stage dancer and we had a good time with it. And so I've talked about that for years. And I guess people thought that I was just kind of joking around about that. And so I do a Facebook Live show, kind of periodically, at least once a week, sometimes a couple times a week. But one of the guys on there said, hey, man, at some point you got to dance on camera. And I was thinking, that's really silly. I'm not going to do that. He goes, well, I tell you what, if we beat LSU, you got to do it. I'm like, you know what, if we beat LSU, I'll gladly do it. And then lo and behold, we beat LSU, so I did it. And now people want me to do it all the time. I'm not going to do it all the time. I'm still semi-retired. But yeah, I mean, it's a good time. I mean, it's one of those things, too. A lot of people get so wound up with life and they take themselves so seriously. And, I enjoyed dancing even now, even though I'm almost 50 years of age. I can still believe that I could get most people in the club. But, yeah, it's just a good time. And listen, there's so much of this in college football that we cover this, and everybody always seems to be so angry. And I've been felt guilty of that sometimes too. So I think it's okay to let your hair down a little bit, shall we say, and show the fans that you can have a good time.
Well, since you are so well known with Mississippi State, what were your thoughts about the aftermath and the issue at the end of the Armed Forces Bowl? And have you heard anything about a punishment potential?
Yeah, all those are good questions. The first thing that I'll say is that I never support any of that. It's like, and I understand it. I don't appreciate it. I don't like it. And I think it paints both schools in a negative light. And I think the rest of that story, too, is that there's so many people that have kind of put this all on Mike Leach. It takes two schools to fight, and 2 certainly did. But, Philip Montgomery, who's a great coach, doesn't have perhaps the controversial name that Mike Leach does. And so Mike took a lot of the blame for all that. And I thought that was a bit unfair, to be honest with you. But there will be some disciplinary action taken. No word on that just yet, but I suspect that you'll see a couple players from Mississippi State suspended for the season opener next year. I don't think anybody's going to get fired or anybody's going to get kicked off the team. But, yeah, I mean, the sad part of it is State had gone through this mid-season roster purge, kind of found a sense of themselves, and played really well the last 2 months of the season. And you win 2 in a row to end the year, so you feel good about life. But this is really all that anybody's talking about is this, this fight. And, listen, I really think the 2018 Egg Bowl fight was worse than this. Mm-hmm. But it paints the school in a negative light, and you never like to see that. And it's funny too, though. We expect these guys to go out and play an emotional and passionate game for 3.5 hours, and then walk across the field and shake hands like we're all best friends. Well, that happens more times than not. But this situation here, Tulsa came in 6-2 and ranked in the top 25. And listen, we're speculating a little bit here, but as well as I do, all week long, I'm sure the speech was, you know what, these guys in the SEC are just as good as them, and then you lose, and that's a difficult thing to live with.
Steve, on the show, I tell Steven all the time that I'm tired of talking about COVID. I'm tired about talking about this fight.
Yeah.
I'll talk about Mike Leach all day. This year was just one of the craziest seasons that I believe I have ever seen from Mississippi State. And yes, it had to do with COVID and everything else. But has there been another program that comes to knowledge in the history of college football that dealt with a purge of the roster midseason? You had this transfer quarterback that came in that lit the world on fire, that he was getting Heisman hype after the LSU game, gets injured, kind of goes away, and then all these freshmen taking walk-ons and starting them, and what was it, 43 players to scholarship players to Georgia, and a total of 49 playing in that game. I mean, this was the craziest season that I believe I've ever seen, with so much drama, and it really wasn't. Not all of it was infused by the coaching staff or the players. But have you ever seen anything like this? And will 2021 just be totally, completely different for Mississippi State?
Well, we certainly hope so. But yeah, you're right. It's been one of those, crazy years. It was almost like, Chinese water torture in many respects. I mean, it's like just when you think, okay, all right, okay, no, Colin Hill has left the team. All right, that's the worst thing that could happen. And then, of course, KJ Costello struggles to read a different song today. But, that was kind of a turning point. I think a lot of people expected State to get embarrassed against Georgia and Ole Miss. They didn't. And I think that really showed that Mike Leach had those players kind of buying into what he wanted to get accomplished. And that really showed down the stretch. You go back and look at A&M, one of the best teams in A&M history. Their only loss is the number one team in the country. That's a one-score game in the fourth quarter, and that's in the middle of all this chaos. That's, Colin Hill hadn't played for the first time, and you're kind of figuring things out with your quarterback position. I think that speaks well of the coaching staff and of the young nucleus of this team. It said, you know what, we're more concerned about who we are than who we're not. And I do think it bodes well for the future. That's the thing. That's what's so crazy. You look at this offensive staff and this offensive team. Just about all of your offensive production is going to be back next year. I mean, we're still waiting to find out what Osiris Mitchell's going to do. But Mississippi State's going to have, probably the highest percentage of offensive production returning next year of anybody in the country.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed, Steve, and you probably have noticed it well before I did, the region media and national media, I don't think they want Mike Leach and Mississippi State to succeed. There's something there that they kind of want. They want to put Mississippi State in the box and keep them there. And there's so many positive things happening in Starkville right now. As you mentioned, all the freshmen playing, the young nucleus of guys starting to come together, the recruiting for the system coming in. There's so many more positives, but the only thing the media wants to talk about is, of course, Mike Leach in this fight, or they want to talk about all the players getting in the transfer portal and leaving. What is your thoughts of this team moving forward? Because I think 2021, not that I'm saying they're going to win 10 ball games, but I think 2021 can be somewhat of a big year for them.
Yeah, I think it's got the potential to be a good year for State. I think they're probably 2 years away from really being a great team again. When those guys will be juniors experience-wise, but, still going to be one things we talked about with all the fight stuff. Everybody's like, oh, well, this guy's saying that. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's simply not important. What somebody else goes and writes and puts their byline on, and they put it out there, that's their opinion. And it doesn't matter. It simply is completely irrelevant. That's one of the things that I respected a lot about Dan Mullen, is when Dan was here, he absolutely did not care about what other people said outside of the building. Mike Leach has that same mentality. He is more concerned about what happens in the building, what happens on the practice field. And listen, if you want to take something that he says and go write an article, you go right ahead and do that. But he's not going to spend a lot of time worrying about your opinion, because it's just not important.
Steve, staying somewhat with football here, going to your books. Let's start with your first book, Flim Flam. No one, I heard you say this on the podcast, no one really picked up the torch and ran with it when all this news was breaking. Clarion Ledger kind of fired a guy who shed light on it and released him, but no one was picking up the story. And did you do it reluctantly, or was it one of those things like, look, if no one's going to do this, I'm going to do this? How did that all start?
Yeah, well, you kind of nailed it right there. And Raleigh Blevins left on his own. To be fair about that, I don't believe that he was fired. And so, but yeah, I tried to give this story to about a half dozen people. And what's interesting is, there's some people at the Clarion Ledger. I was like, this isn't really in my scope of journalism, but the NCAA has had boots on the ground in the state of Mississippi, and they're asking questions about a very popular football coach. And so here you go. I gave them names, numbers, and I offered them everything that I had. And nobody wanted the story. Nobody. And what's interesting is Sam Hall, who was the editor of the Clarion Ledger, some people went at him on Twitter as it looked like I was going to be right about this deal. Of course, I knew I was right all along, but as it looked like the tide was turning, some people were on Twitter going at Sam and saying, hey, Steve Robertson offered you these stories and you guys didn't do anything with it. Sam said that wasn't true. And I responded. I said, Sam, I still got the text messages if you want them. And that ended the conversation, and so,
wow.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it's like, I saw this as an opportunity to tell a story that a lot of people didn't want told. That's one thing that I have a quote in my office that Edward Murrow said that the better part of journalism is telling stories that people don't want told. And this was certainly one of them. And the more reluctance that I got from the in-state media, the more determined I came to make this thing happen. And I never planned to write a book about the Ole Miss NCAA investigation, but I had a literary agent reach out to me and said, hey, there's going to be multiple books on this topic written eventually, and you're the best guy to write this. And so he offered me a book contract, and I took it, and little did we know it ended up being a national book. And it's so funny. Like I read these people, and I just laugh because there's certain people out there and say, oh, well, the book didn't sell. Well, there's a lot of people that made a lot of money on that book that'll disagree. Again, it's kind of like those national college football writers don't like Mike Leach. What these people say on Twitter and social media simply doesn't matter. What they think, what they say simply doesn't matter. And do you really think that these people would publish a couple more books for me if the first one didn't sell? And so when I got done with Flim Flam, the plan initially was to write a sequel to Flim Flam. And I told them, I think we need to let this story play out a little bit more before we go back and revisit all that. And to be honest with you, I was really kind of tired of getting death threats and having my kids harassed on social media and things like that. So I said, listen, I really want to write a good news book. I want to write about Mississippi State sports, and maybe we still do a State Ole Miss angle. Let's write about the rivalry. And so I called Jackie Sherrill, and I called Ron Polk, and I called John Bond, and a lot of Mississippi State greats, and just said, here are some of my favorite memories in the rivalry. What are yours? And so I wrote a book about it, and it was a bestseller, and it was incredible. It was on the Mississippi bestseller list for 46 out of 52 weeks. And Luke, I see you up there, and Luke, I'm gonna comment on that. What I think smells worse is your attitude. I think your attitude is awful. And I think that you are a person that probably needs to go spend some time at church on Sunday because you don't bother me. You can say whatever you want to say. And here's the thing, no matter how many comments you write here, no matter how many comments you write on social media, you can't undo what's been done. You can't undo what happened with Hugh Freeze. You can't change the fact that he was tweeting out scripture in the morning and keeping with whores at night. You can't change the fact that your fan-based media people continue to carry water for him and defend him as if that he was this salt of the earth person. And you can't change the fact that every single one of them was wrong. So you go ahead and tweet and comment whatever you want to say. You will never change anything about what's happened. So go live with that.
And I apologize for that, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny, Stephen. You are the admin to all this, but I noticed that Luke doesn't have a last name. Everybody else that comments has a last name. I wonder why Luke doesn't have a last name. Well,
again, Luke, you can live with it. I mean, it's just, it's one of those things. It doesn't bother me. They can say what they want to say. I live a great life. I got a great family. I got, I got a lot of things that I want and all the things that I need. And so I'm happy. And, matter of fact, there's Luke might want to be watching here in the next few months. Pretty big announcement about some things related to Flim Flam that I can't really talk about just yet. But some pretty cool things coming. So we're going to revisit that story and probably tie up some loose ends with all that. So if you think that's over with, you're wrong. So, and that's another thing too, that I kind of laugh about too. It's like, I can lay out all these other things that have happened. There was other boosters that got disassociated after the NCAA investigation. that hadn't been made public. Maybe we go ahead and do that. Maybe we go ahead and out those people as well. There's some other things that have happened about the potential tampering stuff. Maybe we just go ahead and publicize all that stuff too. So Luke, I mean, maybe I can give you credit in the book and the acknowledgments. Maybe you've motivated me to go ahead and tell a lot more of the story. So go ahead, keep poking the badger.
Steve, I won't throw a lot of darts at the dartboard, and hopefully one of them sticks. You mentioned that there's going to be more news to Flim Flam. Now, Flim Flam was released, 2 years ago? Oh, 3 years ago now.
It was released September of 2017.
Yeah. With that being said, you said that there's some more news coming about that. Are we looking at, a mini-series, an extension of the book? I mean, I'm going to throw a lot of darts at the board, and hopefully you just say, yeah, it's one of those. But is it something where, there's going to be a documentary on this, or we're going to see this on Netflix? Is it going to be something added to the book? Is it going to be a 30 for 30? I mean, is it something along those lines that we're going to see with Flim Flam?
No comment.
Okay.
Okay. That's fine. All right, let's go back to Mike Leach for just a second. What is the craziest, wildest moment that you guys have had so far with his time there at Mississippi State?
That's a great question. I think under normal circumstances, we'd have a lot more time with him, because of COVID, everything has been virtual. But, one of the things that I'll tell you, the first time that I interviewed Coach, I'm thinking 20, 30 minutes, man, he went an hour. And, one of the things about Mike I think is really interesting that people don't fully appreciate is he is a guy that wants to learn. He wants to learn from you too, and so we talked about writing books a lot. We talked a lot about, Swing Your Sword and his book on Geronimo. And I was fascinated to find out, how did he get a copy of Geronimo's birth certificate? He has a copy. I mean, how do you do that? How do you get another person's birth certificate? So he took me through that process. And, he said that when he was a kid, first learning to read in Cody, Wyoming, there wasn't a whole lot to do. And so he went to the library and checked out the thickest book there was so he could have more time to read. And so it happened to be a book about American Indians. And he became fascinated with Geronimo. And so like you're sitting there and you're talking to him about finishing books. That's the thing I don't think people fully appreciate is it's fun to start a book. It's fun to outline a book. It's fun to interview people for books. It's fun to write a book. It's not fun finishing books. You got to go through all the editing process. You got to go through, all the rewrites, and you got to do a lot of fact checking and that sort of stuff. And so that all feels like work. I mean, you pick up the phone and calling Jackie Sherrill and talking about college football. That's a lot of fun, right? And then transcribing that interview is a lot of fun. But then making a story out of that, that takes a lot of work. And so those are the things that get you, kind of get you down. And then all of a sudden you go to a book signing out there and you see people and, people show up and like their family members are a part of your book or their family members are referenced in your book. And that's pretty exciting stuff. Those are the things that make it all worthwhile. All those nights that I sit up here in 3 a.m, researching a fact and trying to find a newspaper article to make sure that we got the numbers right on something. That's all pretty cool. But Mike and I talked about that, and I asked him, I said, do you think you've got another book in you? And he goes, yeah, probably so, but it may have to be when I'm not coaching, and it is a very, very, very tedious process, but he enjoys writing the books. And, what's so interesting too, he and Bruce Feldman kind of co-wrote Swing Your Sword. But the more I've talked to Mike, the more I realized that, Bruce was just kind of like a mentor of sorts, that really it was, Mike's passion was kind of putting this thing together. And Bruce just kind of like helped him through rather than, it wasn't like a co-written book in many respects. I know Bruce probably did some things to kind of polish things up, but yeah, at some point he's going to write another book. And it's interesting too. It's a fraternity, I guess you could say. And once you've been through that process and you know how much work it is, Mike and I kind of bonded over that. And we've talked several times about that. I said, I need to come by and get my book signed. And he goes, yeah, I need to get you to sign yours too. And so that's kind of a cool thing. But one of the things that there's so many people out there that I think are trying to go viral with Mike. Like, they want to ask him, Mike, do you like sweet tea? Who's your favorite Smurf? That sort of stuff. I think all that is really silly. And I think one of the reasons that I think Mike likes our beat is because we talk about football. We don't, because I think when that silly stuff happens, I think it happens organically. I think when you try to force the issue, I think people recognize that. I think Mike realizes that. And I really think deep down, Mike enjoys entertaining people, but I think he'd rather talk about football or American history or something about that rather than, which one of the Powerpuff Girls is the most powerful. I mean, it's like I think some people try really hard to be awfully silly to kind of get him off script a little bit, and I think that comes off real hokey. But I think, this year when he did the air raid siren during the press conference, I mean, that's totally Mike. I mean, nobody asked him to do it. I think somebody asked him to imitate it. Next thing you know, he's got a phone and he's talking about apps and that sort of stuff. That stuff is funny. I think the rest of it is a little bit forced.
Steve, I've always kind of made this joke. If we could just get Mike for the spring game or anything, interview with SEC Network, if we could just get him in a Strange Brew Starkville is Strange T-shirt, I think that'll be the gold mine for social media for at least a week of everyone playing on that. But staying with Mike Leach and everything, people want to knock about his recruitment. They want to knock about how he this and that. But, Leach was never really in an area where he could really recruit strong. Lubbock is, far side of West Texas. And, of course, out in the Palouse, I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you're basically in Canada. But, Starkville's different. He's close to a lot of big cities here. Are we going to see a bump in his recruitment? And it's also the SEC. There's players dying to come play in the SEC. I just thought that dynamic where people say he's not a great recruiter, but that dynamic of kids wanting to come to the SEC, and there's so many great areas, recruiting hot places here in the South that he can now access, whether it be New Orleans, Memphis, Birmingham, the Panhandle of Florida. He's got that access now. Where do you think he goes with recruiting?
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's one of the things that he mentioned when he got the job, is that one of the things that was attractive was the proximity to more Power 5 football players. And that's, Mike Leach has had one. So I begin to think about this wide receiver class that they've got signed for this year, bringing those guys in. He's finding the pieces with which to build an offensive unit around. And you got Sawyer Robertson coming in, who is the highest rated quarterback to ever sign with Mississippi State. Listen, we've done pretty well at times with, some 3-star developmental type guys. But I think Mike, from an offensive skill standpoint, is going to take Mississippi State recruiting in a much different direction. We have had struggles for many years recruiting wide receivers, even when Dan Mullen was here. And a lot of that's because we just didn't throw the football.
Yes.
Today you pick up, grad transfer, out of San Jose State, just signed with Mississippi State earlier today. Guy's got 4 years experience, and forgive me, I'll look up some numbers here for you because I tried to prepare myself. But
take your time, brother. Take your time.
But Trey comes in from San Jose State. 2019, the last full season, he had 79 catches, 1,161 yards. This year, in an abbreviated year, 45 catches, 627. This is the guy that's got nearly 3,000 yards receiving at San Jose State.
Yeah.
And so this is a guy that I'm told he can play outside receiver or inside receiver. He's a flex guy. They'll kind of figure that out in spring practice. But, you go out and you sign 4 wide receivers in this class, and now you bring in a grad transfer guy too that gives you some immediate help. And that's one thing that I was told is we had one spot left on offense for recruiting. We were only going to take a wide receiver if he was a difference maker. Well, there you go. You go out and you get a difference maker. You get a guy that comes in that immediately makes your football team better.
Talking about the receivers, and we won't stay long on this, but if we can predict next year in wide receivers, I don't know if Jalen Wally's going to be the leading receiver of this team next year. Malik Heath showed signs of being the most dominant pass catcher that we had. You got this guy coming in, transferring in. You got some other guys, some freshmen that are highly recruited. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to this offense, and it's already breaking records. But if you had to guess who are the top, 2, 3, 4 receivers next year, who do you think would be the top dog?
Well, I think if Malik Heath develops in the spring like we hope, I think that he's a guy that could be, a real difference maker. I think Tulu Griffin, you kind of saw late in the year, he has a real burst, and he's a guy that's just got to get a little bit bigger and stronger himself. Won the MVP of the Armed Forces Bowl, nearly took every kickoff back for a touchdown. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The most kickoff return yardage since the 2012 Egg Bowl for a Mississippi State player. And so that's exciting. But I think some of these younger guys coming in like Teddy Knox, I think he's a guy that's going to be a real difference maker. I think he plays as a freshman. I don't know if he is the guy, but I think that he's a guy that can make plays in the slot. And I think when you look long-term, I think you feel really good about guys like Antonio Harmon. I really like Rodarius Thomas, former South Carolina commitment in the in-state, takes 2 from South Carolina. And that's one of the things that's kind of a misnomer sometimes is people say, oh, well, the flips always go away from us. But, State flipped a handful of kids this year, including Deshaun Page at Mike linebacker away from Texas Tech. They get Albert Reese away from Rutgers, and then you go out and go get a couple of kids from South Carolina. And that's the thing. Flips are part of the game. I mean, that's
Right.
part of the recruiting game. Even Alabama and LSU, have some guys at some point that disappoint them on signing day. And listen, you hate it when it happens to your team, but you got to respect the fact that it's just kind of part of the recruiting game.
Well, let's go to another sport. Obviously, baseball is about to jumpstart here in just a little while. What can we expect on the diamond from Mississippi State this year?
Well, pitching-wise, we think it's going to be as deep a pitching staff as Mississippi State has had, in decades. I mean, there's a potential to have 3 first-rounders on the weekend. There are a lot of people about Eric Sarantola, a Sunday starter. People tell me he has the best spin rate on the right-handed breaking ball in America. And you know what you got with Christian McLeod, and people love Will Bednar. He is an incredible competitor. He's got that rising fastball where he gets a lot of swing and miss, and that's one of the things in this league. You want to have pitch efficiency. You want to let your defense work, but there are sometimes when you need to get a punch out or get a strikeout without somebody putting the ball in play, and he really excels at that and really kind of found his game out at Long Beach State last year in the series out there. So, and then you've got some junior college guys and some grad transfer guys that are come in that are hungry, and so they're going to be able to use them in midweek situations or perhaps middle relief situations on weekends. But if you can get Sarantola, Bednar, and McLeod to get you 6-7 innings on a weekend, and then you got Riley Self and Spencer Price out there in the back, you don't need to bridge a lot together to get a win. And I think offensively this team's going to be really good. I wish we had one more power bat. I mean, you don't have that Justin Foscue guy that can come up with 2 outs in the 7th inning and turn a game around for you. I think Cam James is a guy that'll make a big jump this year. I'm a big fan of his. Watched him play some this summer. He'll make the move from third to short, and he's put on some weight and is swinging the bat with a little more authority. I don't know that he's a 10, 15 home run type guy, but I think you're going to have a handful of guys that probably hit 6, 7, 8 home runs this year. I think the power numbers will be a little more evenly distributed, but I don't think you have that guy maybe outside of maybe Josh Hatcher or Tanner Allen that you have to pitch around. But those guys are both on the left-handed side. I wish you had one more right-handed power bat.
Yeah. What about Bidintel? Is he going to be a guy that kind of develops there out in right field and kind of become that power bat, or are we still going to try to work through that?
Yeah, Pimentel, I think it's probably the odds-on favorite to start it in left. He was there last year. Tanner Allen was in right and Rowdy Jordan in center. So, yes, I think Pimentel, he's a guy too that, he has some pop in his bat as well. But he was the guy that led them in hitting in the fall, but then he kind of struggled to hit the Division I breaking balls. It took a little while for him to get going. He showed some real flashes, but I'm told, he's the guy that could have a big year for State. And, again, when you begin to look around this lineup, there's not a lot of holes in it offensively, but you just don't, you're not going to have that guy that can come up there and hit a 3-run bomb, 15 times a year. I just don't think we have that in the lineup. I think you've got a lot of doubles hitters. And I think you got a lot of guys that won't strike out a lot. But, Josh Hatcher played first base for State, last year. If you remember, he won the first baseman job as a true freshman. And then once Sandy Cannizaro was dismissed, when Henderson took over, Josh left the lineup and Tanner Allen took over at first. And now Josh Hatcher last year was playing the best college baseball of his career. And then if it had been a full draft, Josh Hatcher would have been gone. I mean, if it had been, 20-round draft, there's no doubt that Rowdy Jordan, Josh Hatcher, Tanner Allen are gone. Well, that doesn't happen, so you get those guys back. And I think Hatcher is a guy that's poised for a really big year. I mean, he has hit some balls, off the batting line center field, to deep center field. I mean, if you miss with him up, he is going to make you pay for it. Yes. And I think that he's a guy that could, really be in contention for potentially some all-SEC type of awards this year.
And my last question for you is this. Obviously, the national championship game is Monday night. You like to talk X's and O's. Who do you like in that matchup down in Miami? Alabama, Ohio State?
I like Alabama all the way. And one of the reasons that I like Alabama is because Justin Fields is less than 100%. If you look at the teams that have given Alabama a little trouble, and even this year's Ole Miss team, it's the teams that are capable of beating you with the quarterback run. And so if Fields is banged up with those ribs and maybe they try to keep him in the pocket, and then he is an excellent deep ball thrower, but I think he is a guy that needs that run pass element to really keep those linebackers honest. And so if you make him one dimensional, I think that really plays in Alabama's favor. And I think Pat Surtain not winning the Jim Thorpe Award probably puts a bit of a chip on his shoulder as well. I think he's a guy that wants to go play well. And let's be honest, I think most people, if we're being, take a deep breath and kind of look at this through the historic lens of college football, this might be the best Alabama team under Nick Saban because they've got such an explosive offense and they are better defensively. I don't know that they're the dominant defense they have been, but I think when you look at this team, how they match up in the secondary against those Ohio State wide receivers, I think they're capable of making plays. And I think Alabama's going to win it. And I think Najee Harris will probably have a really big day and probably be the MVP of the game.
Steve, we're going to have Jake Mangum on the show here after duck hunting season. That was his one request. He wanted to finish out duck hunting season. But sticking with Mississippi State baseball, when you were doing all these stories for the book, what was your favorite baseball story?
Oh, for Alpha Dogs, it was Rafael Palmeiro, without a doubt. And one of the things that I did is I wanted to cover Egg Bowls and I wanted to cover College World Series teams in Stark Villains and Alpha Dogs. And so I've done every Egg Bowl win from 1946 to 2019. And I've done every College World Series team except for 90, 96, 97. And I'll do those in the next book that'll probably be in 2022. But having a chance to sit down and talk to Rafael Palmeiro, about the genesis of his swing, about why he chose Mississippi State, about being here for Super Bulldog weekend and watching Bruce Castoria hit a home run to beat Ole Miss. And then Rafi said he turned to his friend Trenton Torsha, who was also a Diamond Dog, and said, "This is where I'm coming." He said they'd been to Miami games and they may have, 2,000 people, but you come to Mississippi State and it's like a football game, And so it was the atmosphere and the reluctance of Ron Frazier to play him as a freshman that led to him coming to Mississippi State, because Ron Polk told him, if you're good enough to play, you're going to play as a freshman. And so having a chance to sit down and talk with him about his life, and I'll tell you a funny story that didn't make the book, is I saw Rafi a lot that year. He was here for the statue dedication. Then I saw him out in Fort Worth at the Frisco tournament out there, saw him at A&M. And it's like every time I turned around, Rafi was there. And then I was doing a book signing at Campus Book Mart, and him and Lynn walks in. And Lynn says, "Hey, we need to get a book while we're here." And I said, "Hey, Rafi, I'd love to get you in the next one." He goes, "Yeah, let's do it." So he gives me his phone number. I said, "Hey, it's going to be a few months before I reach out, but man, I'm really excited about this." So then a couple months later, I text him and he didn't respond. I was like, this is going to be awful, because I was so emotionally invested in that. And so I finally texted him. I'm like, "Listen, Rafi, I've got an M over S Thunder and Lightning tattoo on my left hand. I would never say anything negative about you. I don't even want to talk about Major League Baseball. I just want to talk about your Mississippi State experience." And so like 2 hours later, he texts me back. He goes, "Hey, can we do it tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, great." And so I got him on the phone, and man, he would have talked all day long. And one of the coolest things that I thought about his story is that, he's there in Omaha at the team hotel, and our fans are pulling up, and there's Rafael Palmeiro out there helping people with their luggage. And I was like, I saw this and I was just blown away. And I said, "Why was that important to you?" And he goes, "I'll tell you why, Steve." He said, "This is my family." And he says, "Mississippi State fans never turned on me." He said, "This is home. These are my people." And he said, "Why would I ever deny my chance, the opportunity to interact with my Bulldog family?" And I thought, here we go. One of the biggest superstars in the history of our program, regardless of sport. And he's helping people offload their luggage after a long drive into Omaha, Nebraska. I think that says a lot about Rafael Palmeiro and a lot about Mississippi State.
Wow, that does say a lot. And thank you for sharing that story. Steve, what's your favorite story of all the books that you've done? What's been your favorite story total?
Well, I'm a little more partial to the Stark Villains and Alpha Dog stories because they're more good news type stories, I would say from Stark Villains, there was a story I did, and if you've got the book, on the back of the book, I blurbed 4 people. You have your little comments, what people say, whatever. So I had a comment from Ron Polk and one from Jackie Sherrill, and I believe I had one from Bob Tyler. And then at the bottom, there was a quote from a guy named Frank Carolla. He says, "I just didn't like Ole Miss. I don't know how much more I can explain that. I just didn't like them. And I wanted to put that on the back because I said there's a lot of Mississippi State people that feel that way. But Frank Corolla, when he was 19 years of age, he and his best friend Skeeter Edwards took a J3 Cub airplane and went over to Ole Miss and poured maroon paint in the bleachers. And then they had collected every piece of toilet paper in Leland, Mississippi from every service station. And then they went and dropped it on Fraternity Row at Ole Miss. So they effectively painted the Ole Miss campus maroon and white. And I've had so many college kids come up to me and say, man, I love that story. I mean, can you imagine two 19-year-old kids flying a crop duster over there and, doing all that kind of stuff? I don't support vandalism, but it was great to find a guy in his mid-90s that had a story that most people had never heard. And maybe I'm a little bit melancholy because Harper Davis has recently died, but I'd always been fascinated about the Alan McKean era, and I wanted to really know why we fired him. I mean, you hear things, but Harper Davis was on that final team in 48. So I had the privilege of interviewing Harper Davis this year and telling his story. And it meant a lot to me, not just because I got to get some insight on Alan McKean, but Harper Davis, Mississippi State's very first round pick in pro football. And, I think the first 10 minutes of the interview, he interviewed me. Want to know how I became a Bulldog, who my dad was, where my people from, And he loved Mississippi State. And he talked about when he married his wife, all of her sisters married Mississippi State guys. He said, so none of the kids ever had a chance to go to school anywhere else. Everybody was going to be a Bulldog. But, Harper Davis was a guy that, I shared this in the book. When the war ended, it was kind of a land grab. Everybody was the NCAA allowed these veterans to maintain their eligibility, to go on to college on scholarship. And Harper talked about that, about how he had gone to a high school football game when Clarksdale was playing at West Point, and they spent the night and went and watched Mississippi State play the next day, and Blondie Black ran all over the competition. And Harper Davis said, right then, as a 17-year-old kid, he said, if I ever got the chance to go to Mississippi State, I want to go be Blondie Black. That was his hero. And then eventually they became friends. Like after they both graduated state and he kind of moved on with life, Blondie Black and Harper Davis got to be friends and played golf regularly. And I think that is a really cool thing, to think that, as a high school kid, Blondie made such an impression on him. And then ultimately they end up being part of the same football fraternity and become friends to the M Club. And I think that's amazing. But Harper Davis, I don't know that we've done enough to honor him, but I'm really grateful that he had a chapter in my book.
Steve, I'll stay here all afternoon and I won't. I'll wrap this up. But I've heard you tell stories before that your favorite player was John Bond and played in the backyard. When you were a kid, you were always John Bond. For me, I was Sleepy. Always wanted to be Sleepy. And still to this day, when I still think number 15 on a jersey, my first thought is Sleepy and not Dak. But with that being said, what's your favorite John Bond story?
Well, there's a bunch of them. I always joke with friends of mine, from back home. I said, 9-year-old me would be awfully impressed that I have John Bond's phone number, and I can text John and he'll text me right back. And it was so great when I wanted to interview him, for Stark Villains, because I told him, I said, JB, you played in some memorable Egg Bowls, but the only ones anybody wants to talk about are 2 you lost. And that's the John Forcade game, when they had the phantom pass interference penalty and Forcade scored on the last play. And then you had the blown back game. And those are 2 legendary games, and we lost them. And it just kind of shows you the color of the rivalry, that we remember. I mean, here we are, 40 years later, and we're still talking about those. I said, well, JB, I want you to talk about all of them, not just the ones you lost, but the ones you won. And he said, thank you. He said, that's the only thing you've ever asked me about. It's the games that I lost. But, the thing about JB that I love is that he is true Maroon. At any point, if you get him around, and I've talked to him some on the sidelines at ball games, he comes around, he hangs around, and that same fire that he had as our quarterback, from 80 to 83, it still burns. He's a high school coach now and doing well and, kind of mentoring young men down there. But when he is at Mississippi State, he'll always be Bond. And, he may cut his hair a little bit, but, he is our guy. And that's the thing that really fires me up is that, when John comes around, if you're walking with him towards the stadium, there's people that come running up. I mean, you'll have people our age who come running up to John like they're kids. I mean, they're like, hey, John, can you sign this? Can we get a picture? And I'm glad that John gets that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm glad that John is still remembered for being one of I get chills talking about it. I mean, because when I was a kid, John was my hero. And I'm so glad that he hadn't been forgotten. There's like, even this new generation of kids, some of them have heard stories from their parents about how great John was. And, and there've been so many of our guys that have come through and matured, and they're kind of a footnote in Mississippi State history, but not John. I think John is still recognized as one of the best to ever wear the uniform. And I can promise you this, his statistics may not match up to this new breed of Mike Leach quarterback, but Mike Leach will never have a more competitive quarterback than we had in John Bond. Now, those are the things that really fire me up, because the first ball game I ever attended, November 1st, 1980, and John beats Alabama. I mean, and I remember later that year, we're getting ready to play Nebraska. My mom told me, she goes, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Nebraska's just in a different league than Mississippi State. I'm like, Mama, but we beat Alabama, So, but I have a lot of respect for John, not just as a player, but as a person. And, really think he's going to do some great things down there coaching high school football. And it's just rewarding, to see my hero still be honored as a hero by the people that I care about. I've shared this so many times to people. I'm not just passing through. I'm never going to go, cover the Miami Heat or New York Yankees. I mean, this is it for me. I mean, this was the destination job for me, was to cover Mississippi State. And you know what? If I never write another book that has Ole Miss mentioned in and outside of an Egg Bowl, that's fine too. I'm a Mississippi State lover, not so much the Ole Miss hater that I'm painted out to be. But I want Mississippi State to do well, and I love living here. I love being able to get up and go to the ball games, and I've shared many times that probably the closest that I am to God at any point in my life is when I'm leaving Duty Noble Field, walking in my car, and I take that turn and I walk back there, and it's almost like I can hear my dad, because my dad brought me to so many games, watch Mississippi State play, and for a moment there, I can almost feel like that he's there, and it's like I always. Sometimes I get all misty-eyed thinking about it. I'll make that turn, and I think I'm just so grateful, to be here and to have these opportunities. Because you guys are the people that I care about, and I'd love to have all the money, but I wanted to do something great and tell the Mississippi State story to Mississippi State people. That's my base. That's my audience. They'll never put me in the Hall of Fame. That's never going to happen. I'm okay with all that stuff too. I enjoy what I do. And I enjoy our fan base, and it has been the greatest joy of my life to be able to tell the Mississippi State story and to document some of these great stories before some of our legends are gone for future generations. That is a responsibility that I take very seriously.
Steve, you said all that, and thank you for what you do for Mississippi State. I've always admired you. That when I first started listening to you, the reason I admired you was the self-loathing Mississippi State fans, because I am so tired of that. And when I heard, I was like, who is this guy? I was like, I already like him because he thinks like me. But when you hold our self-loathing Mississippi State fans accountable and their feet to the fire about things, and always continue to do that. Thank you for that. But you've done so much for Mississippi State. I think you've done so much for writers in Mississippi. I think you've inspired so many people to do those things. And Stephen and I, we talk about this all the time about our show and each other, that and even Mississippi State, that people want to put us in a box and want you to stay there. And the show's not going to do it. Our show's not going to do it. You haven't done it. And those are the kind of people that we want to bring on the show. And so thank you for what you've done for everybody.
Well, thanks for that. I'll tell you that, I think, I tell people all the time, they're sitting your grandpa's Mississippi State. And we have matured so much as a university. And I think Dr. Markeenum is committed to athletics, and I think it shows in the budgetary increases they've given for athletics. They've used the SEC network money wisely. They've spread that around and distributed it to help Mississippi State be competitive on all fields and courts of play. Dr. Keenum's a Bulldog. John Cohen is a Bulldog.
Yeah.
So they understand it. And I don't think, this is the destination job for them. That's one of the things that we have coaches at times that comes through, and, it is a stepping stone job for them. It's not a destination, with the exception of maybe baseball. Baseball is a destination job. One of the top 10 programs in America, and how blessed are we in Mississippi, to be honest with you, to kind of get on the soapbox here for a second, to have had Delta State, to have Southern Miss as a strong G5 program, and to have State and Ole Miss that routinely host regionals and are competing in the College World Series every year. And look at what that does to high school baseball. Look at what that does to youth baseball. I joke with people, and I wrote about this in Alpha Dogs. Every time you see some little leaguer wearing number 15, beating it down the line on a ground ball back to the pitcher, running as hard as he can, that's the Jake Mangum effect, And there, as John Bond was my hero, I think about, look at all these great players that have come through our state institutions here in the last 10 years, and look at the young people they're influencing. They're showing that you don't have to leave the state of Mississippi to play championship caliber baseball. You can get to Omaha by staying home. And, and listen, I want that to be us, but at the same time too, I'm so glad that I'm alive in an era that it is so competitive, and the games matter. It's not just, another weekend, it's an important part of things. And, but it excites me to think about, what there is to come, but I'm excited about Dr. Keenum and John Cohen's leadership. And, we built this stadium, and everybody tells you it's the best stadium in college baseball, I guess with the exception of Arkansas and Ole Miss fans that have probably never even left the county. But I've traveled this conference, and I've covered a college baseball game in all but 2 stadiums in the conference. And South Carolina is one. Everybody tells me, some of our baseball parents will tell you, outside of Duty Noble, the one in South Carolina is legit. And so I get out and I go travel, and it gives you a greater appreciation for what we have. Yeah. And when I get back and I go to Duty Noble, sometimes I kind of pinch myself and I said, I can't believe this place is ours. We're not at a regional somewhere. We're not at Omaha. This is our home stadium. And the cool thing is you get there early sometimes, before the world went crazy, and you get a chance to visit with some of those opposing fans. I mean, some of those non-conference fans, like during the regionals and that sort of stuff, and they just can't believe it. And they all want to hang out after a ball game and get pictures made with Hobie or get out in left field lounge. And even though they've lost the ball game, they feel like they've had a good experience. And I think that speaks well, not just for the commitment to baseball, but our fans as well.
You mentioned that, Steve, of what it's done for the state. I'm 4 minutes from DeSoto Central Hospital right now. I'm 8 minutes away from Snowden Grove Park, where they hold the Dizzy Dean World Series, which I was fortunate to win one year with my daughter in softball.
How cool is that?
That's my claim to fame for right now, right? But you've nailed it. You nailed it on the head. Is that it's done so much, and here, locally in DeSoto County, any kid that's a promising player, they immediately start asking these 13, 14-year-old kids, well, hey, who do you like? You like State or Ole Miss? And it amazes me that I was like, one, we're putting that pressure on kids. I think it's terrible. But 2, there's an expectation here that, hey, if you're a superstar, you should go to State or Ole Miss. And of course, I was a little sad about Blaze Jordan. His father was a year older than me in school, but I was so happy that the thought that him coming to State, and of course, I understood why he went professional, but there's a huge expectation here in the state of Mississippi, especially in DeSoto County. And, I live here in Hernando, and, it's the same thing is that, hey, what kids do we have in the county that could be going to play for the Bulldogs next year? And so a huge testament to that. And I always take it back to Ron Polk. I think Ron Polk started that for everybody in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And, the thing about Polky was, too, is that, because at the time, Ole Miss really wasn't a lot of competition for in-state recruits. I mean, Jake Gibbs and those guys are great coaches, but facility-wise and program-wise, they were behind State. Back in the early 70s, State and Ole Miss split the SEC West just about every year. Matter of fact, I wrote about that in Alpha Dogs with Ted Milton, about Mike Profit going over there and beating Ole Miss and what a big deal that was. And I interviewed Brantley Jones during Stark Villains. He talked about playing against Archie and, striking out their last hitter to win the West and go win an SEC championship against Tennessee. But, during the 80s, Ole Miss was kind of an also-ran in the SEC. And so they've made that rivalry mean a lot more. But, yeah, Polk is the one that kind of built the brand. He's the godfather of baseball. And even Skip Bertman will tell you that. Skip Bertman, despite all the great things he did at LSU, I've talked with him several times. And he says, when Ryan got the job at Mississippi State, he showed people you could make money on baseball. And I really think Ron doesn't get enough credit because even some of our own fans are all upset. He's so obsessed with NCAA or whatever. But you know what? Ron made baseball a revenue-producing sport at Mississippi State. And listen, we had some great coaches. Coach Gregory and Coach DeArmey was a huge part of building Duty Noble Field. But we've always been great at baseball. But Ron Polk is what made us a national contender.
Yeah. This will be my last thing, and I'll get quiet. Stephen and I had John Bond on the show earlier this year, all back in 2020. And after the interview was over, it was a phenomenal interview. Stephen asked him about how he's doing with COVID. And John, in typical John Bond fashion, said, this COVID thing's not that bad. He goes, I wear this gaiter over my face so I don't have to shave every day, and no one knows that I got beer on my breath. And so he was typical John Bond. And when the interview was over, I stole a line from David Lee Roth. I was like, Stephen, a lot of people throw a good party. John Bond is the party.
Oh, true. Yeah. Now, he's dialed it back a little bit in his older years, thank goodness. He probably wouldn't still be with us. But, yeah, I mean, and to about the COVID stuff, I mean, listen, I got a family of 6, and everybody in my family's had it but me, And one thing I want to say before I get out of here, it's back in March when David Johnson got it, Dave is my friend, and, people always joke about the State Ole Miss thing, but
right.
I don't see David as an Ole Miss guy, even though I know that he is. David Johnson's my friend. And Dave and I were in Nashville at the 247 SEC Publishers Convention, and I always look forward to seeing David kind of comparing notes and seeing how Eli and those guys are doing, his family. And so we go up there and we hang out, and then the next day we sit next to each other, and we're breathing the same air in and everything else. And then by the night, Dave's too sick to come to dinner. And we didn't know anything then. I mean, that's, like, I've had people say, I can't believe he would go. We didn't know. I think at the time there were 4 cases in Nashville. So it wasn't like, I mean, at that point, we get home and they cancel the SEC basketball tournament. They cancel the NBA. So it's like all this is happening. We're all freaking out. Well, Dave tells me in hindsight, 2 days later, he was on in ICU. It's so like, it's one of those things that this thing is no respecter of persons, and it makes you very grateful. I told my doctor that I think I've been around about 20 different people that have been infected with COVID, and I haven't gotten it, or if I did, I would say symptomatic. And he goes, Steve, we have a medical term for that. And I goes, really, what's that? He said, fortunate. Fortunate.
Yes.
And so, I've been very fortunate with all that, but listen, there are a lot of people out there that have really struggled. And I tell you, every day when I got up, Dave Johnson was on my mind when he was in the hospital, because then, like, people were telling us he had about a 5% chance to live. And, it almost gives you a little bit of survivor's guilt. You begin to think, I haven't even had a fever. And here my friend is, fighting for his life, and it just didn't seem fair. But he made it, and he's doing great. And it makes you appreciate those friendships even more. And I remember I called him, and we both got emotional on the phone. We're just talking about how grateful we were, because he was worried that we all got it. He was worried that perhaps he had spread it to us, and fortunately we were all fine. But it's like when those kind of things happen, a lot of this bitterness and animosity and that sort of stuff, it really takes a back seat. You begin to realize, that people matter more than the personalities and the principles of all that sort of stuff. But I'm glad that my friend Dave Johnson's doing well, and I got excited this year when when I heard that he was going to be back and being able to ride again. I thought, he'll never have a football season probably that means more to him than this one, just because of the fact of what we've been through. And but yeah, I think it's important to kind of understand with all that stuff that people are what matters most. And the chances of all of us getting together and having a drink and having a good time and nobody getting in an argument are pretty slim.
Yeah, yes.
But at the end of the day, we're all riding this rock together, and I think sometimes everything is bigger than our disagreements and our differences. I think there's all this craziness in our country right now, and listen, I'm an apolitical person. I do vote and that sort of stuff. I keep that stuff to myself because I'm a business person. I'm not trying to go out there and make anybody angry, but there's just a respect. I mean, it's like, and I wrote about this yesterday. I mean, it's just, I respect all people. I mean, not like, but I respect them. I don't want anybody to tell me how to live or how to dress or what to wear or how to cut my hair or anything like that. And you know what? I don't care how you wear your hair. It makes no difference to me. I don't spend any time worrying about how another man wears his hair. It means absolutely nothing to me, but I respect your right to do it. I respect your right to say it. And I think that's where, if we can find some commonality when it comes to respect, if we can respect each other, even if we're wrong, I respect the fact that you believe passionately about something that I may not agree with. I don't think you're an idiot. You've got reasons to believe what you want to believe, and I don't have to subscribe to that. But I think, I guess it was Mark Twain that said, I'm paraphrasing here, but slander is the tool of the loser of the debate, and that's what happens. Is when we have to start getting personal to win an argument with somebody, we've already run out of bullets. You know what I mean? We don't have enough, confidence in our own beliefs. When we got to start getting personal and start shooting at somebody else and saying, oh, well, you look funny, or, you should have been a Backstreet Boy or something like that. The debate is over and you lost. And so, again, and I guess we'll part with that, but I just think that everybody, whether it be college football related, political related, religious related, whatever, if you just give everybody a little room and love them where they are, rather than you would have them to be, life would be a whole lot better for all of us.
Yeah. Steve, I'm going to steal one of your lines. The song of the show, Apolitical Blues by Van Halen on the OU 812 album. It was the extra song on the CD way back in the day. And after I listened to that song, I've always wondered why Van Halen never did a blues album. It was a phenomenal song, but feel free to check that one out.
I'll do it.
Hey, man, look, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope we haven't taken up too much of your time.
No, thank you guys so much. You guys have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, man, that was awesome. Thank him so much for coming on, bud.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Steve's. I listen to his podcast. I've read his books. I will admit, I haven't read the newest book. I always kept thinking, I've had an anniversary. I've had a Christmas, and I didn't get that book and that's what my wife kept asking me, and friends and family. And it's like, hey, what can I get you? I'd love to have Steve's book. So I got gift cards. So go figure.
Yeah.